Welcome back for another installment of Fellowship of the Rink, episode 47, brought to you as always by our incredible local friends in Waggle Golf, 9 Mile Brewing, and Barrel Theory Beer Company. With me here, per usual, Joe Smith of The Athletic, bringing you all the insider info on your Minnesota Wild and Gopher Hockey. Joe, joining me from Tria right now. Any exciting or concerning notes we got to jump in with right away that you've surmised?
Well, I did get here early today, which gave me a chance to see the tail end of the injured player skate. But Kirill Kaprizov was out there. Brock Faber was zipping around, which obviously encouraging news. So you had Spurgeon was skating. Lauko, who's been on injured reserve, is skating. So you're starting to see guys work their way back, but it doesn't sound like there's imminent for Wednesday's game. But I think it wouldn't shock me if Kirill was on the road trip, this weekend. I guess Nashville and Denver and the Avs, and maybe Faber. And I think Hines joked today that Brodin's the kind of guy who just doesn't, not practicing, all of a sudden he shows up and he's ready. So yeah. To not read it too much into him not skating for a week or whatever, but I think he might be out a little longer than obviously Kirill, Brock, and then Spurgeon being on the ice is encouraging too. Just instead of 2 to 3 weeks, it's already kind of been New Year's Eve. He got hurt, right? So that's already the 2-week range in that. So yeah, no, when Ryan Hartman took a shot off the foot and hobbled off to the bench today, I'm like, okay, this is going to happen again. But he ended up staying in practice and stuff. So they can't afford other injuries right now. And facing the Oilers on Wednesday, usually you have your top defensemen against McDavid and Draisaitl with Faber and Brodin and Spurgeon. So it's going to put a lot on the whole group because they're not easy on a good day against your best team, much less if you're battling some depth stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Well, today, rundown, we got a little bit of Gopher coverage. We've got a meaty mailbag. Really appreciate all of you chiming in, both on X, the Everything app, but also got a couple from Blue Sky, Joe, which I didn't even know that you got started over there. I know it's kind of been a every couple of weeks thing. People are like, so when's Joe going to be over here? And apparently you are. So
yeah, I started last week. I finally I came back and I wanted to get myself settled, and all of a sudden when's your Blue Sky thing? And I think we had Blue Sky a meeting about it in our company. Hey, if you want to get Blue Sky, go ahead. I'm like, okay, well, I better get on it now. So
yeah,
it's just hard because you have people who follow you on Twitter and you follow you on Blue Sky. So you have to, you want to make sure you get both at the same time. So
yeah,
we don't have enough apps on our phone.
Yeah, right. It's just going to keep on going. It's pretty crazy with all the apps, but yes, follow Joe over on the Blue Sky app as well now, apparently, like we all are. I just want to get rid of social media altogether, but that's not an option. So Gophers had a really weird weekend, Joe. Get dominated, basically walked off the ice on Friday, but then turn around and dominate on Saturday. So at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot I'm going to take out of this weekend for crazy positives or negatives. The one thing for me, though, do we see Liam Souliere starting to make his case that maybe he's the goalie that they ride come season's end?
I mean, I know they've had the tandem and they both played pretty well, and they're on the different ends of the spectrum personality-wise from what we've gathered. But I think the ideal situation is what they've had in years past, is where they've had their one guy and they rolled with it, right? You go to playoffs, it's hard to kind of go back and forth. You want to have that one guy that you can, that can carry you and that can be the consistent. That's how teams have won titles recently. Look at BU, look at Denver last year. Look at teams in the past. So, I think they're probably going to give each guy more chances. There's no reason to break it up now. But if somebody grabs the net, and they earn it, I don't see a problem with saying, hey, this is yours, buddy.
Yeah, and for me, it's more interesting because it feels like the plan from the beginning has almost been hey, let's see Nathan Arey rise to the occasion and take over this net. As we go through the season, he's gotten a couple of chances to make both starts. I wonder if this weekend against Notre Dame, we get the first Friday start for Liam Souliere. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm with you. decisions should not be made now unless one guy clearly goes out and grabs it. It's just the first weekend where we saw a pretty noted discrepancy from one game to the other, and I'm curious to see if Bob gives Liam a chance here. It is a big homestand too with Notre Dame. Not a ton of homestands here for the rest of the year. I think they've got 3 left, and Notre Dame was a pretty bruising matchup. Like, they were out for blood. They were kind of doing the nonsense run around like idiots thing. And I'll be honest, I didn't notice him at all in the original series in Notre Dame, but Danny Nelson looked pretty dang good for Team USA at World Junior. Yeah. I'm curious to see if he carries some of that momentum back going into this series, and we see a little bit more generated from him. But this is one that our guys on MNCAA kind of posed. Do we need to take 6 points this weekend? Like, is this kind of the last quote unquote safe weekend before a lot of tough road matchups?
Yeah. Like, again, I think they're in a really nice spot right now to where it's not like you're battling for crazy seeding or like worried about them, missing a chance of being in a postseason. But I think as far as like the momentum of a season about feeling good about yourself and going through all that, I think it is important to kind of bank some of those wins and get some of those guys playing some key roles. So they're going to lose some games down the stretch. Like, they're going to have those moments, but the key is responding. And I think Bob Motzko said this a few times where there's like 3 kick the garbage can moments in a season. I think you have, like, where you're a coach and you can kind of like lay into guys or can kind of give one of those speeches in the room. And I would be not surprised if it wasn't after the first game last weekend and you saw how the guys responded, So I think that, they don't have to go undefeated over the weekend or undefeated the rest of the way, but I think it's more so the process and how they get there, especially as guys continue to come back from injuries and get healthy. Because you want to be able to be peaking at the right time. You don't want to be dominating all through the middle of the year and then all of a sudden get to playoffs, you get a big injury or you have a little bit of a rut. So I think it's more so about, everybody in the NHL talk about peaking at the right time. And I know it's hard to do, but I wouldn't be necessarily worried about sweeping these ones.
No, that's fair. And the plan is for me to be out at both of these this weekend. So if any of you are out at the game, hit me up, DM on Instagram, Twitter, whatever. Happy to meet up between periods or something. Only 2 bigger notes for the Gophers we got from national pundits. Hearing that the early favorite for Team USA's coach, World Juniors next year in Minnesota, per Elliotte Friedman, could be one Bob Motzko, which would be really interesting, coming kind of off the heels of David Carl saying he will not be coaching the team.
And that'd be a great fit. I think he would love it. And obviously for being in Minnesota, just be a, ideal situation. And yeah, David Carl is going to be passing on that next year. I mean, a lot of us think he'll be in NHL potentially. But still, I think Bob would love that opportunity and do really well with it. And I'm not sure which Gophers might be on the team next year or not. I have to look and see who would be eligible to be there.
Zemer for sure. I would think LJ Mooney gets a long look. Outside of that, there's going to be some guys that are kind of questionable. I would think Whipple too is probably a guy that's got a decent shot at cracking that team.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah. I'm trying to think of who else. Who are the other freshmen coming in too? I think of who else. I think of recruits that might be able to come in. That would be.
Mooney's the only one that comes to mind right away for me. Oh, maybe Phillips too. Maceo Phillips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, I'm looking forward to, I think, covering World Juniors next year in Minnesota. I'd imagine one of us, me or Mike, will be covering it. The team will be on a huge road trip. I think Ottawa had 9 road games from like December 17th to January 7th. So
yeah,
and the Wild will have some off days in between. It won't be just a straight road trip, but I'm sure one of us, me or Mike, will be here along with, I'm sure, Scott Wheeler and stuff. So we'll have a lot of that covered from end to end.
That's going to be pretty awesome. And you actually caught this last note, Joe. Tell us what's Frank Seravalli saying?
Yeah, I saw when the radio hit said that Rinzel with the Gophers, is obviously going to be a stud, defenseman in the NHL, and then he could have a similar impact that Brock Faber did coming in later in the year or the first season, which is high praise. And it's obviously a guy who's earned it with his play in Minnesota, and reason why he's a touted prospect. And man, like the Blackhawks have a lot of guys coming, don't they?
Too many.
So many good, eventually they'll be good again. But yeah, I think that's interesting things. I think we've talked to Bob a lot about the blue line this year compared to other previous years and the ones that obviously produced like 5 NHL players. But he's been really bullish on how good this one is and how deep it is, and maybe under the radar compared to other ones that have come through because of the bigger names. But, they definitely feel like a group mixed with veterans, but also some of the younger guys that are top prospects that could really be a foundation to a team that could go on a run.
For sure. Quick word from one of our partners before we jump into the Minnesota Wild mailbag. Hey, Fellowship of the Rink listeners, January is the perfect time to swing by 9 Mile Brewing, Bloomington's first and only tap room, where our friends are serving up some incredible brews. Whether you're taking a break from alcohol or not, they've got you covered with their brand new NA Hoppy Wheat Ale, full of bold, hoppy flavor without the buzz. And for those craving something a bit juicier, check out Grace of the Goddess, their juicy IPA, or sip on the smooth Kernzabon alt beer, or Simple Twist of Grain, their crisp Kernza lager. Both brewed with the Kernza grain. And be sure to keep your taste buds on alert because I believe it's actually already out now, the Bumbleberry Sour. Don't sleep on it. And while they got your attention, they do have deals this January every Thursday for buy one, get one on their THC Thrive 4-packs. And of course, if you're the competitive type, they do have their legendary birthday cribbage tournament coming back Thursday, February 6th, with 72 teams and a $200 cash prize up for grabs. Don't wait. Head to 9milebrewing.com. That's the number 9, MILEBREWING.com, and go under the event tab for all the details and signups. See you soon for a pour or two. As we mentioned earlier, we got quite a bit of input and feedback from the listeners on both Twitter, X, and Blue Sky. Pretty Minnesota Wild heavy here. We'll kick it off right away. We've got Jake, Edson, and William with a ton of numbers. I'm not even going to try. Both asking essentially for your evaluation on what you've seen from David Jiricek thus far since being called up.
I think it's hard to come in like you did. And he at least he got some time in Iowa to play, because they told me, I talked to him today for a little bit. He said, he hadn't played a lot of hockey, obviously, in the past year. And it's, you need to get back into shape, because it's one thing to be a scratch or this, and you get back skated, but its game shape is different than just being overall in good condition. So, but yeah, I think there's some flashes. Like, obviously you can't teach the size he has in the reach. There were times in the San Jose game where he really made good pinches and offensive instincts for reads there. I'm still trying to figure out, the skating, can still be a little bit of an issue. They need to obviously improve that, which I'm sure he'll get the Marco Rossi treatment this summer and have him spend a whole time with Andy Ness and work with that kind of stuff. No family weddings. Yeah. Hey, it works. But I think getting the skating for him, it'll be so important, because you try to figure out what kind of player this guy is. And he's obviously a touted prospect, but he's not a big, bruising, Eric Chernak force, right? Sure. And he's not a guy probably going to run your top power play. So he's somewhere kind of in the middle, where it's hard to find right shot defensemen with size that can skate. And if he can turn into that, which is why he was drafted so high, be very important to have, as you see guys like Bogosian, who may not be here, forever. You need a right shot defenseman in the system to step in when you have Faber there on the right and Spurgeon, but the left will be Zeev eventually, with Brodin and go from there. So I think it's important to be patient with him right now. I think he's probably playing more than he probably should be with the injuries that are going on, but it's also a good experience to see what he needs to work on. But I know it's a lot they give up for him too. So I think hard for a player to sometimes live up to when you give up 4 picks for a guy.
Absolutely. All right, next one up then. We've got Prestin Douville asking, how concerned are you with the injury history of pillar players like Brodin, Spurgeon, and Eck, most specifically Spurgeon?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, it's not something that they don't get hurt on purpose, right? And I think he's a really tough guy. It's just hard when they go back-to-back years like this. You have to go through lengthy rehab consecutively. Coming off the back and the hip surgery last summer, he came in tremendous shape. And I think people wondered at age 35, could he still get to that level that he was before? And lo and behold, in the first 2 months of the season, he was that guy. And he was one of the better defensive defensemen in the league. Him and Brodin were great together. So to get this recent kind of injury from the slew foot, really, it's not good. I thought when it happened, like it could be season ender, when the way he went down and I saw him walk out in crutches and a big, huge leg brace, you're like, what happened? Could he could have easily broken something, but the fact that he's skating now, it's been a couple of weeks, encouraging for the rest of the season. But I see the question's point of, it does seem like each year there's an injury to Brodin, there's an injury to Spurgeon, there's an injury to Eriksson Ek. And I know Ek, for example, and plays a really hard game, so he's tend to get in those injuries. And Brodin has the toughest matchups. So, but you definitely, the best ability is availability. People always told me, right? And you need to have, those guys are so important and so irreplaceable, which is what makes those injuries, I think, frustrating for fans. And I'm sure even John Hines would love to be able to roll out Wednesday night and have Brodin on up at, I guess, 97 every day. And now your coach, you don't have those options anymore. So I think as guys get older too, you'll maybe start worrying about that a little bit more. But my bet is that Spurgeon comes back and he comes back and plays to the level he was at the beginning of the season. But that is something that you have to take note of if it happens a lot of times, and the serious injuries more than the little small knick-knack ones.
Yeah, and the one that really stands out more to me is with Act 2, where it's not just losing a player of his impact, but it feels like it's every year, like right at the start of or in the middle of a playoff round. And it's like, great, like there's nothing you can do at that point to like adapt and make changes for that. Whereas like if you find out you're going to have that issue going into the playoffs and you can make a move at the trade deadline to at least pick up someone that's filling a similar role, not going to be a Joel Eriksson Ek, but at least fill the role, because like that's a massive gap in your lineup. And all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, you're just not going to have this guy who's bred for the playoffs. Good luck.
That's what happened a couple of years ago, right? The Dallas series, and he tried to come back from the broken leg, and he looked great in the skating, and then all of a sudden he did that first shift, and he couldn't do it. So, and that's one of those ill-timed injuries, right? There's no good timing for it, but I think that the Wild have been hit with that a number of times the last few years, of having those injuries at the just absolutely wrong time.
Yeah, for sure. So going off of that then, from Alec, how busy do you expect deadline day to be?
Well, they don't really have much cap space, right? So the only way I see them being active is if there is an injury that goes into a little more LTIR, right? Where you have some space to work with, because there's just, they haven't really been able to accumulate a lot of space over the course of the year either, with all their injuries. Like they're to the point where they needed to have Lauko on LTIR just to get Jiricek up to play and to put 6 defensemen out there. So, things can happen in between now and then. I don't see them having players right now that they're going to be able to just swap out big contracts to get a contract in. I think there are guys that would be great fits, like a Brock Nelson. Overall, don't know if he'd be able to fit at the deadline, but he's that type of player, and he'd be more of a guy that I'd look that the Wild would be able to sign this summer in free agency, since they'll have more money to play with. But as of right now, it could be a very quiet deadline. But a few years back, I think they had cap issues, and all of a sudden it got freed up due to injuries, and they made a bunch of deals. So, but I think for right now, it seems like it could be one of those quiet deadlines based on only the fact that the cap space is the way it is.
I don't know why we thought of this the other night recording Judd's Buds, but do you even give a little consideration to the idea of bringing back the greatest center in Minnesota Wild franchise history, Ryan O'Reilly?
They wanted, they had him for what, 15 minutes? They had him 15 minutes. Yeah. Well, and again, like that's, I know you're joking, but I know Elliotte Friedman had a report the other day about how he doesn't have a no move clause, Ryan O'Reilly, but they're going to treat it as though he does. And so if there's a chance for him to move to a quote unquote contender or have to be an exciting package, so they wouldn't be able to just, you know, it'd have to be a very good package for that. So I don't see as joking aside, I don't see the Wild as a player for Ryan O'Reilly.
No, that's very fair. Let's see here. Then we've got a couple of people asking on this one, Alex Pierce and Gritty Season. Do you anticipate Buium, Ohgren, or Yurov joining the Wild by the end of the season without major injury issues continuing? This interview is brought to you by our friends at Waggle Golf. Waggle Golf believes what you wear on the course should reflect your individuality, who you are, where you're from, your hobbies, interests, and passions. All the stuff that makes you, well, you. That's why every design is inspired by the desire to create a piece of apparel that strikes a chord when you see it, that makes you say, wow, that was made for me. Because in a lot of ways, it was. Ready to get your waggle on? Go to getyourwaggleon.com, throw in promo code SP10 at checkout to take 10% off your entire order.
That's a tough one. And again, it goes to cap space as well, see if they can fit in guys for that. My instinct would be probably won't be a guy like Yurov. Probably, I think there's a chance on Zeev. I think they have to figure out the cap situation first. And Ohgren, I think it'll be dependent on need, right? If there's guys are healthy, if you have Lauko back, you have all these guys, they want him to really be seasoned there and play a top role. And for right now, there's not a top 6 role available to him for him. So unless they're in need of, he continues to dominate in the AHL, and there's no reason for him to stay there, and they find a role for him at the NHL level, then I think Zeev might be the most likely of the if he does indeed decide to leave at the end of the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Zeev is the obvious candidate. But with Yurov, I feel like he'll probably get a couple games if they bring him over at the end of the season. I just don't think he's necessarily a guy that's into the playoffs, right? The one that really interests me, though, is Ohgren. Are you with me, or am I being a little too stingy here and thinking that you don't bring Ohgren up unless it's to play on the second line, right? I don't want him playing bottom 6, even if it's for playoff hockey. I'd rather see him continue to thrive doing what he's doing in Iowa.
And the third line right now, Trenyan and Foligno and Gaudreau has been really good in their role, right? You need a checking line. You need to have those guys. And so unless there's that spot, that Johansson spot on the second line, which he was given that opportunity earlier in the season or during camp to play that role, wasn't able to kind of finish like he was in previous levels. So unless that spot is available, for me, I don't want him play on the fourth line. Not that he can't kill penalties and do all that stuff. Right. But unless there's I know fans are the fourth line hasn't scored anything the last month, that they've had these guys. But unless there is that specific need, and he's going to be here for the long haul. He's going to be a guy that's going to be, they hope, much like a Marco Rossi, a fixture in that top 6. So if they don't have to rush him, if they don't have the need, that they probably won't bring him up just to be the 13th forward or 12th forward. Yeah,
very fair. Let's see then. Next one. This one is from Blue Sky. We got 2 left, both from Blue Sky. From Karma Constable. What does the backup goalie situation look like for 25-26?
I think that obviously depends a lot on how Wallstedt finishes the season. To me, I think we obviously talked to Marc-Andre Fleury over the weekend. He said there's no chance he's unretiring. So as much as I think he'd be a great option if he wanted to come back, and I'm sure Gary would sign him for another 1 year, and he'd be a great kind of situation there. That's not going to happen for that. So I think the whole idea, even going to this year, people might have thought before they signed Fleury was it's going to be a Gustafsson and Wallstedt tandem, and I do believe that could be the case next year. But at this point, they got to make sure he's absolutely in the right place physically. I know he had a lower body injury recently he'd been working out with, and mentally. I know this year he talked to some sports psychologists to try to get over the some things that he was working on, obviously stemming from maybe his performance and the role going back and forth. So, but I think he's absolutely capable of playing in the NHL. He just has to kind of be more consistent at the AHL and get his kind of game in order to be have a great summer and put himself in a position to where I wouldn't be surprised if it was a Gustafsson and Wallstedt. I think that would be best case scenario if they them to have two goalies that they can count on like that.
Yeah, I think everyone's hoping that that's the situation that makes sense. But there's been muttering out there of, is Fleury really going to retire? But it sounds like you're not giving a whole lot of credence to that. It's possible, but not likely.
I mean, never say never, but I think he asked him point blank in Vegas, and he's like, he kind of laughs and no chance. I can't keep on doing this. Oh, one more year. He does look like he can still play. So, but
yeah. No, fair. All right, well, last one here for our good friends at Waggle Golf. Everyone go to getyourwaggleon.com. Make sure you throw in promo code SP10 to take 10% off the entire order. This one comes from Derek Felska via Blue Sky. Joe, what is the best NHL video game of all time?
I mean, I started out with Blades of Steel. That was my first love as far as hockey goes. I think from my age, which you'll tell based upon my answer, I think like NHL 93, 94 would be mine. Like peak Solane, peak those guys. Like,
yeah.
It was just a phenomenal game for me. I know the graphics and like everything has gone way up over the years with different technology and different systems. But Blades of Steel was a lot of fun for me initially getting into video games and sports video games. And NHL 93, 94 was up there for me. Just like Madden 92, 93, those were like my main, when I was like 10 to teenage years, like played it all the time. So that'd be mine. How about yours?
So I actually reached out to, so it's my college roommate's older brother, who is the authority on not just hockey, but all video games. Yeah. He said the official list is NHL 94 on Sega, NHL 14, and ice hockey on NES. For me personally, I like some of the like older, even Gretzky's okay, but there was, I think it might have been the lockout year. It might have been NHL 05, where they had this mode on the game called Free for All. So you and up to 3 other people could all just be an individual player playing in one end of the ice. And it was like first to individually score 5 goals. And like they did the whole European thing where like if you were leading, like your helmet would all of a sudden turn gold.
Yeah.
That one, like weirdly, I just loved. I would just bust out Marty St. Louis every time and just zip around everybody. It was a great time. I liked that. And I really liked, it was probably because it was perfect for my age when it came out too. But NHL Hits was awesome.
Oh yeah.
The 3-on-3 thing, they like made a whole like joke out of it, like crazy players, crazy rinks you play in, you throw guys over the boards. And it was pretty much the race to, okay, you're taking one of Colorado, Detroit, and New Jersey. Which one are you going to be? Because those teams were loaded. But 94, that to your point, that's one that everyone like holds in pretty high acclaim. And actually, so my roommate from college, for his bachelor party, his older brother set up a tournament of 94. We all literally like drew cards to like see what order we picked in, and he got like 4 plastic cups with like team logos on it. So like whatever cups you got, that was your team. I had to pay someone to get the Penguins cups. I'm not embarrassed to say that. But so I'm not going to like pretend that there were no adult beverages involved, but it was not the crux of the reason here. My buddy Pat and I play each other. It is vintage Winnipeg Jets versus Pittsburgh Penguins. We made it 1.5 periods in that game before realizing we were both using the wrong controller. Like we thought we were controlling the other people because it was like that, like weird and laggy. Like I just like not used to how that worked. And the game was 1-0 at that point, mind you. Like it was a 1-0 game, and somehow we both thought that we were like using our teams and we weren't. And then finally it like kind of caught on, and I like went the other way with my guy. I'm like, holy crap, just switch controllers right away. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, we both have been the wrong team this whole time. Oh, so God. It's always a little jarring going back and playing those old games. Like the one for me, GoldenEye, was my favorite game like ever on Nintendo 64. If you go back and play it now, I'm like baby deer, like just can't even walk. It's horrible. But back in its day, 94, I think, is the winner across the board if you were to poll everybody and give them truth serum if they actually played it in its time. But thank you everyone again for the questions. We'll have another mailbag coming out in probably a month or so per usual. But as always, feel free to ping in with questions if you guys have them throughout the week and things you want to make sure we cover. We'll do our best to make sure we're bringing you all the wild info that you guys care about the most. Joe, that leaves us here to wrap up on the weekly hot take segment. Keyboard Warriors, brought to you by our incredible friends at Barrel Theory Beer Company. Again, folks, make sure that whether you're pre-gaming, post-gaming in the tap room, or going to games at the X and hitting up all of their offerings, whether that's the Crowler of the Day at Section 105 or on every level, their drafts of Raindrops. So we've got here 3 hot takes. One of them actually got deleted, apparently, off of the Twitter/X. So I won't say who said it, but it's one that could have gone either way, if I'm being honest. It was the timing for me that was more hot takey. After the Vegas loss, which you got to cover up close and personal, someone said that they posted the Wild's record against West playoff teams, and it wasn't a good one, but said like, this is a huge problem, basically. Where do you land on the concerns with stacking the West?
Yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate thought of like you have to play these guys at some point and beat them. I think I've talked to people before, and like obviously it's important in the standings, important in points, but people look at this in different ways in terms of the timing of these games, who's healthy in these times. Like the game versus Edmonton tomorrow, like this will be a playoff team. If they lose that game, they still have no Kirill, no Spurgeon, Brodin, Faber. Like, that loss doesn't really mean as much, or at least if I'm measuring them up against these other teams.
Yeah.
They're like, well, they played Winnipeg multiple times at the back end of a back-to-back, right? Like, so, but still, it's one thing to be like 6-7-1 or like 6-5 or like whatever. It's like 3-9-1, I believe, is the record against the Western Conference playoff teams. The Dallas game was terrific on the road that I covered out of the Christmas break. Like they showed they're capable of winning on the road against that team. They did it in the playoffs 2 years ago. I think Russo's joke was like, if they get to the final, they'll sweep it because they beat every Eastern Conference powerhouse like Washington, Carolina, Florida, Tampa. So they'll sweep the Cup final. They just have to get there first, you know? Yeah. But I think there's a legitimate thing, which is why I gave the team a B+, controversially in the midseason grades.
Yeah, hot take.
Granted, that was the grades were put in before the Carolina Washington road trip. They had lost 5 of 8. They were struggling against the Western Conference. Like, you know, again, I'm a fair grader. I'm not a harsh grader. I'm just saying like B+ to me is a really good grade. And it didn't take away from how impressive the season's been and compared to expectations for what the start of the year would be. But yeah, I don't think it's something that they need to get in their heads about losing those teams, because they're all individual games based on matchups and injuries and who's healthy and who's not. but eventually they're going to have to beat them. But eventually they're going to have to beat multiple to get out of the Central Division. You'll play Winnipeg or Dallas the first game, and maybe you'll have to play the first series, and maybe you'll have to play Colorado. So clearly, I don't think they're worried about it in that stage, but I think it'd be important down the stretch to win some of these games, like maybe in Denver on Monday with a more healthy team.
Yeah, no, that was it for me. Like a month ago, I would have 100% like agreed, reinforced the statement. It's just the timing of it where like the team is so decimated for that Vegas game specifically. And then you look at the back-to-backs, who's healthy, whatever, like you said, that's where it was very like knee-jerk hot takey to me. But like the sentiment as fans I get, and I'm sure the players think about it a little bit too. So all fair. Hot take number 2. This one, Joe, you can be as delicate or not delicate as you want on this. There was a article written on Hockey Wilderness. There was a screenshot that ended up going around Twitter, and fans are getting pretty upset. Proposed trade between the Wild and the Sabres. Matt Boldy, Hunter Haight, Marat Huznadinov, all packaged for Tuck, Quinn, and a 2025 third.
I mean, I love Tuck. Like Tuck's, a great player and a guy that, the Wild know pretty well. I just don't see in really many other circumstances them trading Matt Boldy. I just don't see it. And obviously that package seems a little lopsided too. But I think
you got to throw in a Buium or a Faber to really make it fair for the Sabres.
Only give it Kirill, maybe Kirill, but throw him in there as well. Yeah. And then a ton of Hockey Day Minnesota sweatshirts or something like that. Let's that
would play.
But yeah, these playing the GM in these trades. I've done them every year of like who says no to stuff like that. I think the Wild would not do that trade.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty quick hang up the phone for Bill Guerin. Last one here, and this is an interesting one that I just came across this morning, Joe. Jesse Marshall, colleague of yours over at The Athletic, covering Pittsburgh Penguins, says that the NHL is killing content creators. A little bit of detail on that. Apparently, the NHL has taken efforts to manually go back through the backlogs of anyone who creates content on YouTube using NHL footage. They're demonetizing them, which, fine, that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also getting copyright claims up to basically stop people from doing it anymore. They're trying to remove this old content. And I understand why the NHL protects its content. Sure, it makes sense on the surface, but the NFL does not do this. The NBA does not do this. The MLB does not do this. And it's tough for, I know for Jesse Marshall in particular, he does a lot of work with talking about systems and actually using video to reinforce things that he's seeing on the ice. It's already hard enough for some fans to pick up some of those concepts. But now if we're going to remove this and completely gatekeep, you're just limiting further growth and expansion of fans and getting people more integrated with the league. Where do you stand on this? Should the NHL make their content available to be used in those types of ways, or is it something where no, they should be gatekeeping it for monetary, financial, whatever reasons?
Well, in one instance, I get that the rights holders pay tons and tons of money, to have exclusive rights to the footage and game footage and whatever else. And so I get from that instance some sort of copyright, but I also know that the league needs to grow the game and they need to get more fans. And some fans will watch more on YouTube than have a FanDuel subscription, right? Not everybody has cable or has access to it or whatever, but if I have my phone and I'm younger and I want to watch clips of this, or listen to a podcast or whatever, I would want to try to find a sweet spot of not carte blanche, just giving access away to everything or saying it's okay to just, pirate all these stuff and steal it. But there's got to be ways to, integrate into social media, into YouTube, and different kind of channels to attract different kind of fans or attract new fans, or just keep fans. So there's got to be a balance. I don't know where the legal balance is, but they got to be a little more open-minded with that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, and you're totally right. Placeholders thing, like that is a big issue, and I'm sure the main reason that this is happening. But like you said, a middle ground somewhere, like whether maybe there's like preferred partners or people that get further licensing from those rights holders or directly from the NHL and have some kind of way to get it out there, or partnering with those rights holders to generate the content that's going to help like grow the game and get highlights out for fans. It's just, it does seem weird for like clearly number 4 on that list of the 4 big leagues to be stubborn and prohibit expansion. But again, definitely not a simple solution. Like I don't even know for sure the best way to approach it, but there's got to be a middle ground somewhere.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe we'll find it someday. But that rounds out then the hot takes for this week, Joe, unless I don't know if there's anything you had top of mind or anything you've seen that just kind of threw you back.
No hot takes for me. Like, I know we had a kind of like a hot button issue we wrote about in the Insider, Weekly Wild Insider and The Athletic. Me and Mike Russo did. As you know, like the Wild will play in Nashville this weekend. First time to play them since the Spurgeon New Year's Eve slew foot by Zach LaRue. You're just talking to players about it, and like they were obviously upset it was more like a 3-game suspension and this and that. Even Marcus Foligno told us that obviously there'll be a price to pay at some point there for it, whether it's him or somebody else on Saturday. But just the idea of these suspensions and fines being lenient by the player safety program, and I've had players and former players tell me it's all in the CBA, and so it's all collectively bargained. So if the players really want to have more penalties for their teammates getting really hurt, then they can go to the table in the CBA negotiations this year and fight for it. I don't know if they will or not. They haven't yet, but it seems like it happens all the time that people complain about a player being injured, and rightfully so. That was a dirty hit by a guy who's had a history. But to change it, like it's all the reason why the fine's $5,000 is because it's collectively it's a maximum they can do, or 50% of the daily salary. So there's got to be a sweet spot where you have to hit him where it hurts. And a lot of times that's not getting in a fight. A lot of times that's not a suspension. Time that's give him like a $75,000 fine for a knee or for like a hit to the head, So
yeah, and I mean to that end too, I think the other thing that should be considered on that front is what happened with Dallas coming out of the Christmas break. Like a $100,000 fine to the organization doesn't do anything to prohibit it. If anything, it basically invites and says, "Oh yeah, you can just do this," and there's no real punishment. Do you think bigger monetary fine would be the solution, or is it better to shift that monetary punishment to, say, the coach? Because him sacrificing 50 to 100,000 for that practice, he's not going to hold that practice anymore.
No, you're right, and I'm sure the organization would pay that for him, But yeah, I think it would hit you where it hurts, and where a guy who's been in the league 20 years like Pete DeBoer he already knows the rules, like it's not like he's a new guy. Mm-hmm. So I think there's whether people will agree for this to happen or not remains to be seen. But that's the only way I think you're going to get some of these things out of the game is if a guy will lose money because he'll be suspended, so he'll lose those game checks, right? So it will hit them more than just like this, but the little fines that they do without suspensions, like $5,000, like that's like money on the board, that's whatever,
if that. Well, yeah, again, thank you, Barrel Theory. Appreciate you, as always, for bringing us the hot take segment. Joe, as we round out here, plug away. Like, what's going on? What does everyone need to be looking out for coming from you and Russo over at The Athletic?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, our weekly Insider columns are back every Monday or Tuesday. For us, we did the flower prank thing with Cindy the week before. This week we had the stuff on LaRue and the suspensions and the Wild, and obviously another Fleury stuff and Bogosian, the T-shirt made for Rocco Rossi, stuff like that. So that'll be every Monday or Tuesday. We'll keep coming out. We'll have a mailbag coming out hopefully next week. So fire away. We'll send out some alerts for that tomorrow to answer some questions for you guys. Doing the player pool again, which will be a lot of fun as we go forward. And we'll have some things going into the Four Nations that I think you'll be excited about too, related to Wild players.
There we go. Well, Appreciate everyone tuning in. If you don't already, you know the deal. Love it if you'd either subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or over at the Soda Pod YouTube channel. 5-star review. It all helps. But back on the interview grind, we got an exciting one we've got coming up for you guys next week. Stay tuned. We'll drop out some teasers. But I don't know. We're in the thick of it here, Joe. New year. New Wild. Hopefully we all get healthy soon. I don't know. Knock on all of the wood that exists. But this is where it all happens. Like, this is the new season. Let's see what we can become.
Yep, it'll be a fun next 2-3 months. And then I think after the Four Nations is the stretch drive and the trade deadline. That's where it really gets kind of heated up.
That it does. Well, appreciate all of you tuning in for this week's installment of Fellowship of the Rink. You stay classy, State of Hockey.